Good evening. This is Brett Slater and the Secret to Money. This evening we have Marcus Denny. I came across Marcus on YouTube. He's got a YouTube channel called The Project Civilization from 5000 BC to soon. I know you're not really doing that right now, but that's how I found you. Marcus, tell us about yourself. What are you doing now?
Well, a few things. I'm in my mid-30s, and from about the year 1999 until about 2014, I was involved in various businesses. I've always been self-employed. At the height of my career so far, I had a national company which employed over 50 people. And so I've always been, I suppose, closely aligned to some of the issues with banking from my own personal experiences in business. I think that people who run companies are more likely to understand some of the problems that we're facing simply by the fact that they're closer to the laws of economics than, say, employees or people who work for the government. But in the last couple of years, I've been undertaking a law degree. I'm a volunteer for the State Emergency Service. I've been doing some consulting, reading a lot of books, but the reason why I've taken that path now is that around about 2014 I reached the final conclusion that I'd had enough of entrepreneurship. The way that the banking system currently is, I don't want to participate anymore in this current system until something changes, for a whole number of different reasons. Probably the biggest reason is that when the next crash comes, it's going to be very disruptive and it's going to ripple through the economy, and a lot of businesses who are doing fantastic now are not going to be doing well. And often what happens in corrections is that you lose everything. And I've already experienced that in my careers before, and I don't want to repeat that any further. So I undertook a law degree as a way of changing away from entrepreneurship. I am a member of one of the main political parties, and at some point in the future I'll look at a pre-selection. But I'm just basically not prepared to keep going with entrepreneurship until something changes. Now, that also applies to the housing bubble as well. I mean, a lot of my friends have made millions of dollars in construction and real estate, and they're quite happy to do that, but that's not a fulfilling career path for me. I'm not interested in profiting at the expense of humanity, so I still have fairly large morals and values, and that's the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing at the moment.
Yeah, man, that's wonderful, because actually it kind of, I think why we've linked up is because we're looking for the truth, and that's definitely out there. And the more people like you and I find out what we're believing in, and letting more people know about it, it'll make the journey quicker, I think, anyway, and we can teach as many people as we can. So I'm guessing that's really who you want to help in the future. You're looking to help the next generation.
I look at it from the perspective of, if I was to have children, I don't have children, but if I was to have children, would I want to bring them into the kind of society that we're living in now? And the answer right now is no. I think that we've lost a lot of ground. A lot of the ingredients to society which used to be good for us, limited government, sound money, entrepreneurship and innovation, the nuclear family, having savings, a lot of those good fundamentals have slowly eroded over the past 30 odd years to a point where the current state of affairs is not sustainable, it's not healthy, people are not any happier, and it's not a place worth living in. I mean, I suppose you could become suicidal if you look too far into it. I'm not suicidal, but I have actually, in my early 20s, I read a book called Crossing the Rubicon by Michael Rupert, who is a US author, and he wrote a very large book actually on the end of the age of oil and the American Empire.
Ooh, nice.
And I was actually fortunate enough to speak with him in 2013. But the following year, he took his life. He shot himself. And he was a person who was deeply affected by what he saw, and he just couldn't keep that balance right. And ultimately ended up taking his own life. So
that is the crux of a lot of this. Where we were talking earlier about where are we going to go from here, and can you find a way, which we've spoken about as well. Like we've definitely talked about how to help people. When it comes to empathy and like your turning point, when was it? Like when was it? When you were a teenager? When you were in the middle of business? When you were driving that truck up north, as you were saying?
I think 2007 was probably the year, because I had I'd learnt about peak oil that year. I'd learnt about the banking system, how it operates when I was at university. I'd read that book by Michael Rupert, Crossing the Rubicon, that same year, and so that was a very sobering year, and it really made me look at things from a different perspective. My parents were not informed of the topics that I'm informed of. They are now, but they only got there in their 60s. They were not like that when I was younger, and so I just had the typical middle class upbringing. I went to a private school. We did all the things that normal people did, but to me, I was never a sheep. I didn't like conforming. I didn't like the idea of any career path when I was in high school. I always wanted to be self-employed. My father was self-employed for most of my upbringing. He was actually a Baptist minister before I was born, but he gave it up. Wow. And I'm not religious at all. But my parents are still married. I had a fairly decent upbringing. There's no complaints. I wasn't abused or anything like that. I just wasn't exposed to some of these issues. And once people do connect the dots, these are very depressing topics, and people do feel overwhelmed. They do feel like there's nothing that they can really do to change things. I've obviously spoken to quite a number of people who've messaged me over the last few years from doing these videos. Some people have moved to the countries and live like hermits. But I don't think people need to be that worried about the enormity of these problems, because actually change does come about when a small minority of people get together. If we look at, say, the recent changes a few years back that Tony Abbott tried to do with the GP co-payments, I'm not saying that they were good or bad. People didn't like it. They took to the streets, and then the federal government withdrew that from the table. Likewise with Kevin Rudd, he brought up the carbon tax, which it's definitely got its problems. But the key with the carbon tax was it was the government recognising that we have a problem to do with finite resourced oil and climate change. Now, carbon tax wasn't even 1% of the addressing the issue. It was a very small step. People didn't like their bills going up, and they fell out of love with it very quickly, and it was ultimately removed. So society has the potential to stop things when it really wants to, but what it really needs to be more concerned about is just how much the banking system affects everyone's life in a negative way. It's invisible. It's like radiation. People can't link up how the misery in their lives is connected to the financial system, but it is connected whether people choose to look at it or not. And the moment people can make that connection, the faster we can get people together to start complaining, to start protesting, to start writing to their politicians. And the timing of this is very close to what I think is going to be a major financial crash, which will last for a long period of time. We've had these before. Australia has been here before. We were there in the late 1800s when we defaulted on our debts to Argentina. Our property prices nearly halved in value. It took over 30 years for them to recover. We've been here before. The world's been here before. These experiments in money and in just endless printing do not work. We don't have free markets. We're not under a socialist system, but we're under what some have called an interventional system. So the Trans-Pacific Partnership is an example of that. It's not a free trade agreement. It's an agreement between nations, and it's not in the best interests of humanity or people. When people look into the problems, they'll find that actually the solutions are very simple. It's just a lot less government and honest money, letting free markets determine the interest rates, and we can all be 50 times happier if we live in that type of a system, and we'll be smarter for it. The happiness that would come from just those two changes, they're almost impossible to imagine because none of us alive have seen it.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, this is what I'll go back to just before, because you were talking about money and currency, and like I've watched one of your videos on gold and silver and currency. Can you give us just a quick explanation of what's the difference between real money and what currency is, what fiat currency? Because this is the one that blew my mind once I really understood it.
Well, the whole problem really stems from the fact that humans had to find a way to trade. And before we had anything called money, we were trading using barter. And that's a very inefficient process because you have to run around and look for someone who's got something that you want and give them something that you've got to give them. And so the market has always tried to find a solution to this. And gold was that solution because it was a unit of account, it was a medium of exchange, it was portable, it was durable, it was divisible. 1 ounce of gold looked the same as another ounce of gold.
No matter where.
And it maintained its value over time. And so throughout history, that system's been abused. People didn't carry gold around with them. It was too dangerous. So they had these claim receipts, similar to, say, if you went to a dry cleaners, they give you a receipt. The receipt's not worth anything, but that's your ticket to get your clothing back. And the same with gold. The banks would hold the gold, and you'd have this claim receipt on it. And the banks would always create more claim receipts than they had in the vault, and this is where the abuse and fraud took hold. And before long, the banks were insolvent, and you would have bank runs, and eventually governments would try and intervene on that.
Yeah.
But the whole system the whole problem is we want an orderly supply of money. We want it to go up slowly, or we want it to come down slowly, but we don't want it to just explode out of control, because when that happens, it throws out price signals. And when you throw out price signals, you create asset bubbles, you put the economy into a constant state of unnecessary flux, which upsets the real demand. Real demand can easily be created if the government decides it's going to do a pink bat scheme like we did a few years ago, or it's going to put $2,000 in everyone's bank account. You can't really do that with, say, a gold standard, because you've got to have it on reserve. Now that's possible. Governments used to run surpluses. I mean, America hasn't had a surplus in well over 130 years, but they used to. And there is a way to keep money scarce, and when you have it scarce, people find solutions in business. But when you have these booms, staff end up being paid too much, you get inefficiencies, you get malinvestment, it goes on.
Laziness.
It goes on for a period of time, and then it collapses, and then you've got bankruptcies, people lose everything, liquidators get involved, the courts get used to sort out these disputes. It's an absolute nightmare. And when I sometimes read in the newspapers people who've been assaulted or raped or something like that, and they talk about how bad that is and all that sort of thing, I'm not discounting the severity of that, but I think to myself, people who've gone through liquidations and lost everything, those people are hurt mentally, psychologically for potentially the rest of their life. I mean, we don't really talk about it. We say, oh, well, that's just what happens when you go into business. But people who go into business don't plan on failing. And it's the same with people in jails. They didn't plan on getting caught. We don't realise the mess that we're in until we have a go and take a risk. But very few people are taking a risk anymore, and I can understand why, because the banks don't lend to businesses anymore. They used to. The majority of their practices were lending to businesses, and that stopped basically in the 80s, and it's only gotten worse since. And so they mainly now invest in consumption loans like credit cards, home loans, car loans, things of that nature. But people don't realise that when you issue a loan for a house, the buyer effectively gives it to the seller. Now, the seller might be a speculator who'll then go and buy another house, or they might go and buy a BMW or go on a nice holiday or something like that. And we're just creating a Ponzi scheme. But a lot of this money ends up flowing back into real estate, and the real economy gets a very small amount of it. So you've got this massive pile of currency chasing real estate assets, which are highly overvalued right now. People don't seem to realise this. And meanwhile, the economy is just devastated. You look in Australia. What have we got? Everything's a service industry. We've got cafes everywhere. People are having smashed avocado for $20 eggs for breakfast on the weekends. People don't have any savings anymore, and I can understand why, because you don't get anything for it. But savings used to be a good thing. They're a way of allocating capital at the right price, at an interest rate that was determined by the market. All that's gone, and people just aren't that appealing anymore. They're not very intelligent. They don't really know much about the way the world should work. People just think that all they care about is how can I make as much money as possible, but they don't realise that that's the microeconomic side of the economy. The macro is that if the system's a Ponzi scheme, if everyone's making their money off the housing bubble, which in the case of Australia is half our economy, people don't realise that. You might work for an accounting firm and think, well, I don't work in real estate. Well, people do, because people in the housing bubble are using accountants, they're using concreters, they're using all sorts of services that are actually benefiting from the bubble. And the moment you have deflation or a serious correction, the banks will end up insolvent. The Australian government cannot bail them out because it's too big. CBA is half our economy. No one seems to realise that. So you can't bail it out. When America bailed out Lehman Brothers, it was only 5-10% of their economy. It was small enough to bail out. We've only got 4 banks over here. We don't have the diversity of banking like the Americans do. And we somehow think that we're this sort of lucky country. We benefited from the mining boom, which was basically just Chinese money printing over the period of the global financial crisis, which made us look like great economic managers, but it was just sheer luck. And our banks were in trouble too. A couple of them were bailed out by the US Federal Reserve as part of an international bailout package to keep the system stable. And that was in the trillions of dollars. And
that's the last people we want to bail us out.
That was in the trillions of dollars.
At the top.
Yeah, that was in the trillions of dollars. Yeah. So we're not lucky. We're the kidneys in a global system, and if the host gets a bullet in the head, every country will come down in similar fashions. This next crisis is going to cut down the developing nations substantially as well. Prosperity, as we know it, is being based on a lie, and that lie is going to be unwound at some point. I don't think it can go for much longer. I've been surprised it's gone for as long as it has. I really think it's here in the next 2 or 3 years. The cryptocurrency bubble, which blew up at the end of last year. I don't think cryptocurrency is going to be the solution, and if you want, I can tell you why later on. But one good thing about it was at least it made people look into banking and say, oh, what's fiat currency, and why do we want honest money, and what is Bitcoin, and why is it going up so much, and all this kind of thing. So it's done a really good job in at least educating people on money and all that kind of thing. But unfortunately, it's just been used as speculation, and businesses are not really taking it on in large amounts, and nor can they, because the price is so volatile. And so I think ultimately,
amazingly volatile.
Yeah, I think ultimately it will fall. People think that it's got these magical properties, that it's decentralized. Well, no, it's not, because all you have to do is put regulations on the exchange providers and businesses that use it as a method of payment, and you can regulate the industry quite easily. And then people say, "Oh, but the drug industry needs it." No, they don't. They use the banking system. The substantial drug money that's awash in the world economy goes through the likes of HSBC in normal dollar digits like we're used to. It doesn't go through cryptocurrency. So I think people are a little bit misunderstood about that. I understand that they want governments to fail and they want crypto to be the new kid on the block and they want to get rich in the process, but unfortunately that's not going to happen.
Yeah. So back to the gold and silver just for a quick one. Like when we're connected to gold as a standard, like that basically is our free market. Like that gives us the stability that we're not printing money because we can't print it, because unless we have the gold, then there's nothing to back it. So that creates a more of a stable economy.
Gold is ultimately, it should be the shackles that keep the general economy and governments more honest. It does have a lot of problems though, and it has failed in the past. Really nothing survived because people ultimately pervert the system. There's always a way around any system. I think the difference is to what degree. Steve Keen is a very prominent person in this area and he's not for a gold standard. I can see the problems with gold standards, and the other problem with the gold standard is if you went back to one tomorrow, no one has any gold. So you would have to make it illegal, you'd have to redistribute it again, and then you put the banks in charge of that, and then we get back to where we started from, which is if they don't lend it to businesses first, we're going to end up in a mess. And so I think there's a serious issue with gold standards in the transition point. Yes, if we could get through that, maybe we could have this kind of utopia, but that's the valley of the shadow of death. I can't see a way that we can really get around that. Jim Rogers, he's a very famous person in this area. You can YouTube search him. He believes we should have a multitude of currencies that the free market chooses to use. And that's one way of a solution. I agree with that. I think we should be able to use more than just Australian dollars to pay our taxes. But whether or not we get there, I'm not sure. I think the banks need to have serious regulations placed on them to stop them from blowing up asset bubbles. And if we can achieve that, we need to find another way to stop them from doing it again in 50 years' time. Because that's the problem, is that when everyone's died, the problem will come back again.
Well, I did hear that one of the states in America has now made it legal to pay taxes in Bitcoin. I don't know which one it is, and it was literally only passed last week or last.
These are interesting.
Jeff Baerbock is probably about that one. We can ask him.
Yeah, whether they get very far is yet to be seen, but I think the real problem that we have now is that no country can really act on its own. We kind of need a big global crash again so that all the nations can get back on board. But I suppose the next issue there is governments wouldn't be this big in the first place if it wasn't for the printing press. And governments were very limited in size. Over history, they've always been limited in size. And politicians used to also be very accessible. You could go and meet them in the centre square of, say, Greece 3,000 years ago. In fact, even America, the president didn't even have protection. He had to fend for himself on the street. So if he was a bad guy making lots of bad laws, he'd be assassinated. And so, ironically, Abraham Lincoln signed the act that became what now is the Secret Service to protect the president. He passed that, the signed it off the same day he was assassinated. So these days it's the complete opposite. You can't approach politicians. They're very much guarded by securities. And that might be because maybe they're making a lot of people upset. And
you know it. There's a
it's
our
why
Parliament
rich
House
people,
is getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah, it's why rich people have very high gates, because often there's victims in front of those gates. So yeah,
somebody's wanting to get in. No, absolutely. So what other topics would you like to talk about? Like, I know we talked about a few things.
I think what people really need to try and learn, apart from the banking system, is we need to measure the world that we live in today against some kind of criteria so that we can see whether we're on track or not. and that's really something that bothers me a lot, because I think about these things all the time, and a lot of people don't. And we do have in this country, there is a lot of regulation, unnecessary regulation, and it stifles creativity, it stifles entrepreneurship, and governments are becoming too large, and there are too many jobs that are being created by governments. In Victoria, for example, we have an exploding prison population. We've removed suspended jail sentences some time ago. Our prison population here has risen by almost 70% in the decade leading up to 2016. We now have a new run of privatisation in the jails. About half of them are run by GEO, which runs Guantanamo Bay. We have Group 4 security running the prison vans, and they charge exorbitant fees to transport prisoners around. There's a double standard in our prison system. We've got the inmates are treated quite well in the government systems, but in the private systems, they've got all sorts of weird rules placed on them, and there's just not enough care put into running the facilities due to, obviously, the fact that it's trying to make a profit. And we have, and in other areas where we shouldn't have privatisation at all, like power stations and public utilities, they've all been scattered by previous governments, and that's causing large cost prices, say, in electricity. This country has so many resources. We should have electricity prices at 8 cents a kilowatt hour. Instead, they just keep going up. We're spending too much money in things that should be cheap, and we're spending not enough money in things that should be expensive. And if we're going to take climate change seriously, if we're going to transition off finite oil resources, which really need to be saved for the future as well. I mean, no one ever talks about the fact that these things should be conserved for another 1,000 years worth of future generations. The way that we're going, it'll be run out in my lifetime. So there's no one at the wheel, and that's what people need to understand. At the top end of government, there's no one. Those people have their individual problems. They're on the phone all the time. They're making press speeches. They're not able to deal with the complex issues of a modern society. And a society which doesn't educate itself relies on politicians to spin buzzwords to make them feel good, and they decide which way they're going to vote accordingly. We need reforms in so many areas. We need to reform the education system. Pressuring kids to make career choices at 15, I think, is child abuse. I think the real age for maturity of an individual is about 30 years of age. We already see that the courts apply more lenient sanctions on people up to about the age of 25. I think it's ridiculous to think that a 21-year-old is an adult, and I think that's a big reason why so many young people are disillusioned and taking drugs and on antidepressant medication, because they've been told one thing, that they're adults and that they should be rational and have all the answers, and they have no clue what they're doing. And having obviously gone through that myself, you look back in the rearview mirror and you think, what really went wrong here? What could have been done differently? And I think that schools need a curriculum for kids to actually use in their lifetime. There's no point studying physics if you're not going to use it when you're an adult. And this idea of just dumping all these broad types of subjects onto kids just willy-nilly, and then thinking they're going to sort their lives out is just bizarre. It's inefficient as well. I don't have all the answers as to what should happen, but I know what doesn't work, and definitely the current system doesn't work. We've got governments with these HECS debts. The reason why we have $100,000 degrees is because the government will lend us the money in the first place. If you remove that, degrees will come down in cost dramatically. The delivery cost of education is very cheap compared to what they're getting. These universities have become these massive part private, part government monsters, and people have multiple degrees now because they've made bad choices in the first couple because they didn't know what they were doing. And meanwhile, anyone can start a business with no qualifications, and a lot of my friends don't have any qualifications, and they're worth more millions than people earn in multiple lifetimes. And it's only because they just did the opposite to what everyone else did. Um, so educating is not the only solution. I think education is important. I've done a lot of it in my mid-20s and later in life. I didn't do it when I was younger. But I think, we need education reform. We need people to understand certain immutable rules similar to, say, just cogents principles that apply to nations in international law. A just cogent principle is that no nation can commit genocide. If they do, any country can invade that country to stop that genocide from occurring. Well, we need immutable laws that say that we need honest banking no matter what. We need limited governments no matter what. There's always going to be a good reason to have the government expand in size. We can't fix every problem. No amount of extra police on the streets is going to make the drug problem go away. So drug laws don't work. I wish they would, but they don't work. So we might as well just remove them. If we do that, the price will come down. Drug dealers won't exist because you'll be able to buy them legitimately. And we just need to do what we do with tobacco and alcohol and just have education programs that try and tell people not to use them. But this idea of putting 21-year-old kids in jails for 15 years because they tried to import a substance from overseas. Okay, what they did was the wrong thing, but throwing the key away for 15 years is not the solution either. Drug laws, they make a massive state, a massive police force. They put people away who really basically just tried to engage in a free market transaction, and we have to resist increasing the size of the state. We're getting more draconian every year. We've got these new firearms prohibition orders coming out, so that if someone's got a prohibition order against them, they can be put in jail for 10 years. That's not the solution either. These people, okay, they're involved in the criminal underworld. I don't agree with it, but that's what they do. And some of these people have been shot at before. And throwing them in jail for 10 years just because they've got a firearm under their seat, that's not going to solve anything. They're going to do it anyway. It's just another reason.
That's the way they want to go.
Every time you pass a law, you have to enforce it. And that means more courts, it means more police, it means bigger jails, and that's why we see these problems. What we need is sound money. We need the banks to go back to lending to businesses. We need people to be entrepreneurial. We need to give people the tools to take a risk, take a chance, do something that'll benefit humanity and get you rich in the process. And if we can do that, we have a chance of going back to a better way of living. But at the moment,
it's a tough one. And I guess that kind of brings me back to the next question about the education system and understanding money and finance. And I've tried to explain it to people like that we want to be able to use, like Sherlock Holmes, whenever you follow the money, you get to the root of the problem. And like we've said, with most of these problems, it comes down to making money. It comes down to the lending the money or setting up a jail system, and that's what it is. It's funded by bigger people wanting to make more and more money, and the normal people just don't see it. How do you think we can educate the kids at school to become more aware of finances and basic money understanding? Like I know the look on your face already is like, that's a big one.
It's a difficult one because I honestly had no idea when I was back in high school. I had no idea about these things when I was even 21 years of age. It requires people who are old enough and smart enough and have the guts to go out there and push these issues to government, whether they try and seek pre-selection or whether they talk to their family, make videos, organise protest groups. People need to be a lot more active. And I've made videos on YouTube. I've had lots of people contact me over the years. I've stopped people from growing their businesses, servicing the housing bubble. People who are not sure if they should or not, who decided not to after watching my videos. I've inspired people to wake up and start doing things. I'm just one person. So with kids, it comes down to the fact that adults need to run the curriculum. And the other thing too is the jury system works very well in the courts, and it's the only system that we use specifically for sorting out disputes either with the state or between parties. But the jury system could also go further and run other areas of our society. For example, a jury-type steering committee could potentially run the agenda which politicians get to debate. I mean, why let politicians tell us what's good for us if we could have other people come up with what issues they need to go and solve? Another example is the Senate. I mean, the Senate system of government has been around for thousands of years. Before we had telephones or the internet, we've all got smartphones now, so the people could actually be the Senate. We don't need a Senate to represent us. We can just do it ourselves. We could log into our phones once a month, and we could. I think we should be forced to vote on more things. I think that people need to stop just taking from society and actually realise that we're all part of society.
Yeah.
And people should be encouraged to have more of an involvement. I think that's half the issue at the moment, is that we have this epidemic of selfishness, and everyone thinks that someone else has got the job to look after us all, but there's no one there, right? We don't realise there is no one there. That seat's vacant. It's always been vacant. The curtain is empty. Yeah, these issues need to be systematic, and they need to be, whatever systems we have in the future need to be non-negotiable, and they need to bind politicians and other stakeholders in ways where they, I won't say they can't be corrupted, because all systems can be corrupted, but they need to have, they need to be rigid in form. Everything's about money. The fact that we can even have this communication is about money. Even the food that we eat is about money. So, unfortunately, things become corrupted because money's in the way, and that's always going to be the case. We're never going to get rid of that. You know, there's been ideas about running these utopian fantasies where we're all going to sing Kumbaya and exist on a planet without money. That won't happen, and it's silly to think so. You're only alive. You're only renting your own life. We'll all be dead in 80 years, right? So there's no point working on a project that's 160 years in the making. We need to focus on short-term things that we can achieve in our lifetime, which is ironically how we got to this mess in the first place, because we got this advance with oil. We could have done it sustainably, but it would have taken 400 years. And the people who are now dead didn't want that to happen, so they did alternatives, which got us off the ground a lot faster. Henry Ford's an example of that. But this is going to be a combined effort. It's going to take average people to wake up and start doing something, talking to people, making videos, protesting. We need the curriculum to change at schools. We need limited governments. We need honest money. We need to not see expanding our jails and just copying the Americans as being the only solution. There's got to be other solutions. And we need to do it fast, because younger generations are like goldfish in a fishbowl. They have no idea what normal could be. They think it's normal that you stay at home now till you're 30. They think it's normal that there's very little chances of repeating the quality of life, standard of living that their parents have got. They just think all this is normal. And I've had conversations with them. There's a sense of despair, emptiness with people. They have fleeting moments of happiness. You think that they're kind of happy, and then you look further into it and you realise that actually underneath it all they're quite confused. And the feminist movement is not good for women. I mean, you've got women now who have been discouraged from having families because they've got to participate in this we all go to work crap. We don't actually all have to go to work. You know, back in the days when it was primarily men working, the money system was expanded when women came into the workforce after the death of so many men in wars. It's not the amount of dollars you're getting that counts. It's what you can buy with it. Tram drivers in the 1970s were only getting like $170 a week, but back then a beer was like 2 cents. So if you took a beer now, which is what, $8, $9, $10 in the pub, and divide that by your weekly income, you're getting a lot more beer in the 70s now for your wages than what you are now. And this is the problem: is that people think that inflation is necessary. Every year they try and increase their wages. It's this constant vicious cycle of trying to keep up with the money system, and the money system is expanding faster than you can actually get your wages to go up. And we don't need that to happen. These things are totally unnecessary. They're man-made. You don't need to have $1 million house.
Yeah.
It's totally unnecessary. It's all man-made. It serves many interests. It keeps people earning money in their sleep, some people. People who've done well, it's been based on their birthday, not based on merit. And we need a system. Honest money means we succeed by merit. We don't succeed because we were born in 1959 when housing was cheap, and now we've got 10 houses in our own name, and we've got our kids living at home at 30 years of age, and the kids are going to get the house one day when mum and dad pass away and all the rest of it, but it's not going to happen because those investments are going to go down so substantially that whatever these kids think they're going to get when they're 50, it's not going to be there. So this is a big house of cards. People have...
Actually, we talked about before as well, Mike Maloney, which you've met, and that's the inspiration for The Secret to Money. That hidden secret to money, the 8-part series that he did. I try and push that to as many people as I can, even though people say it's in the US economy, but we're still running on the same idea. Would you recommend those kind of books as well to educate yourself to get? And actually, the Rich Dad Poor Dad, that series of books was what helped me open my mind. That gave me that moment of clarity. What books do you really want to talk about to let people understand what we're trying to get over?
I think any type of information you can get your hands on is important, but be mindful that each person has a hidden agenda. Mike Maloney sells gold. His books have value. Robert Kiyosaki has interesting points. All of them have their strengths and their weaknesses. No one of them have a perfect idea. I'm an advocate of reading into both sides. For example, if you don't believe climate change is real, well, don't just read books that say climate change isn't real. Go pick up a few where someone's actually gone down to the South Pole and done some, rolled up their sleeves and done some work in the freezing cold. A lot of people just they make their mind up first about what they want to believe. So they believe that, say, that the Queen is a reptile, and they'll go pick up books that say that the lineage of the royal family dates back to reptiles. I mean, it's a crazy way to live.
It does just creates confusion in your own mind to get clarity.
You've got to be skeptical about being skeptical. I mean, some people are so they're so conspiracy theorist that when something does just happen, like a guy in Las Vegas just decides he's going to go kill a whole bunch of people from a hotel, these same people are turning around and saying, "Oh, it was organised by the government. It was an agenda to ban guns." No one knows. I mean, you weren't there. And to think that governments are that efficient that they can organise things, they can't even keep drugs out of jails. I mean, they're not that competent. You're giving them too much credit.
So they don't care.
Yeah, they're just people. You've got to be skeptical about being skeptical. And another thing I'm a big fan of is understand how your brain works, okay? Because you learn how to drive a car and they give you a license. If you want to drive a boat, they give you a license, and yet no one even knows how their brain works. The human brain is a self-patterning learning success system which seeks synergy. So what that just basically means is that it wants to have sex and it wants to survive and it wants to feel comfortable. And so people make up these little narratives, these stories about how things are as a way of going back into this kind of coma so that they can feel safe again. And people don't like being anxious. And, if you don't know something, just admit that you don't know it. I think I hear these debates about Donald Trump and whether he's a good president or not. And I think the people who are passing off judgment, they have no idea if he's good or bad. They don't even know what criteria they're marking him against. Just be proud enough to say, look, I don't know. Maybe he's good. Maybe he's got some good points. I don't know. Instead, people are so sure of things, and really they haven't spent the time. I mean, if you haven't read hundreds of books and really spent large tranches of time looking up some of these issues, you really don't know. Look, I've got that same issue myself, and I struggle with it daily. But I'm skeptical about being skeptical as well. And
nice.
I think,
so if you had a time machine, what would you do? Go back and change?
Um, gosh, if I could change it, I really wish I could make the average life expectancy a few hundred years, because I think
Nice.
a lot of these problems are we're dead by 85, and
Yeah.
if we were living for 200 years, we'd see all these cycles. It'd be so easy. We wouldn't need to listen to politicians or anything like that. We actually have the real-time experience. And, I find myself getting old now because I'm talking to people 15 years younger than me about things, and I hear people say, oh, well, they were the old days, it's new now. And then I'm like, oh, that's what I used to say,
Shut up.
Yeah. Shit, I must be getting
Wake
old.
up. You want to slap him in the head.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
So-
I talk to him all the time. I totally agree. Yeah, okay. Lovely, man. Man, it's been great talking to you. And actually, so what would you class as freedom? That's another good question.
Freedom is where people can live their own lives doing whatever they want that doesn't affect other people, that isn't as a result of being indoctrinated or coerced by the state.
Yeah.
There's a very fine line between educating people and indoctrinating them, and I think we've moved further away from the education phase onto the indoctrination phase. When the baby boomers were getting free education in universities, obtaining a degree wasn't all about making money, having a job at the end of it, and that's very much changed now. The arts are a road to nowhere, and they're not where they used to be. And I think it's very important that education, that we see that as a sanctity issue, that we don't mess with it too much. And it's been messed with. The curriculums are shocking, and we're not using that time for giving people what they really need to get through life in. And there's so many people out there who are 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. They're just like, they've got the mentality of a 15-year-old. They really don't know anything. They know enough to do their jobs, and that's about it. It's scary. I mean, I'm all for democracy, and it terrifies me at the same time, because I've participated in elections, and when I hear what the average person out there has to say about things, some people they want to bring back the death penalty. They want higher jail sentences. I mean, there's all these ideas have consequences, and you need to follow those consequences and see whether or not you've got the same opinion at the end of it. And often, if you look into these things, what you think might be the right way is maybe not necessarily the right way. And but we don't talk enough. We talk with each other when we have an election cycle, and that's about it. And one of the big problems about politics is that when a politician says, well, this is my mandate, this is what I was voted in for. Well, politicians don't go to the elections with one policy. They go in with about 15. So which one of the 15 did you vote for? And which ones didn't you vote for? Yeah. And it's a real issue, because these guys just get in. We're intensely indoctrinated for a month or so before the cycle completes itself, and then we just go back to sleep until the next election. I really think the technology has to come in here at some point. I think the people need to be more involved in what laws get passed. If you look back to a YouTube video with, he's dead now, he died in 2005, he was the richest man in Australia, Kerry Packer.
Oh, yeah, yep.
He was interviewed, in court actually, saying that since he was a boy that thousands of laws have been passed, and he doesn't believe that the world's a better place for it, or the country's a better place for it, and if the government wants to make a new law, they should repeal 2 old laws first. And we really have to get this mindset into our heads, is that we're just making more and more laws, and if you go and look at other societies, the German society is more sophisticated than us. So I've been there a few times, and nearly half their economy is manufacturing, and the average person there they really do put Australians to shame. China, for all its problems, they respect the corporations that they work for. They put in hard yards, and they don't have this kick the boss attitude that we have here in Australia.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to start a business in Australia unless you had some pretty safe contracts in place with whoever to do what you've got to do, because with all the bureaucracy and laws, it's just too difficult.
Harder and harder.
And I know people who are in their 50s and 40s, they're getting so fed up. Some of them are retiring now, some are retiring early, some have moved to the country, some have moved to Singapore, some have moved overseas to America. They're getting out of here because this place, I mean, to quote one person who's now overseas that I know, he said, you want to have a business that sells something into Australia, but you don't want to live here. And you don't want to have the business employing people over here. And it's really sad because it doesn't have to be this way, and it shouldn't be this way. People, if you're happy in this society right now living in Australia, there's either something wrong with you or you don't know what's going on. I mean, G.D. Krishnamurti, who died back in, I think, 1986, he once said, he was an Indian philosopher, he once said that it's no sign of health to be profoundly well adjusted to a sick society. The problem now is that people don't know the society they're even living in, because it's been a gradual, slippery slope to big governments, over regulations. When I was 18, you could smoke. When I was 18, you could smoke in bars. You can't do that anymore. You used to be able to go to a tanning salon. You can't do that anymore. There is no end to this slippery slope, right? If the government's going to step in to protect its citizens, one day we won't be able to leave our houses. It'll be too dangerous. You know? I mean, we can't.
We're all going to need guns and big fences.
Yeah, we can't fix the problems of our world with bigger governments. We can only fix the problems of our world with smaller governments, balanced budgets, honest money, and we need to spend less time on pleasure-seeking activities and narcissism, and more time worrying about each other and fellow man, not just our immediate families and our children. It's a very big issue. We're very disconnected from one another in society, which is a tragedy in itself.
Yeah, very sad. And you're studying law now?
Yeah, I'm at the late end of a master's in law, so I'm nearly finished.
Wonderful. Because as we're talking, Matt, there's many more questions going through my head that I really want to ask. I'd love to have you back again another day. I think we've been already going well over an hour, and I know we could keep talking.
This is true.
And I know it's late, where you are. Shall we cut it short? And,
no problem.
Mate, I loved chatting with you. I definitely want to do it again. And sorry, everyone, we've got a little technology problems, camera, microphone. So we were working on it at the beginning, but it was driving us mad, and now we just decided to do the interview. So if there is any difficulties, is there anywhere people can find you as well? Do you want more people contacting you?
Yeah, look, I've got some more people lined up for interviews on YouTube. I've been unable to really keep that momentum up at the moment. I've been so busy, and I've been overseas recently. I'm not massively engaged at the moment, so probably the best is to look up a few videos. I've interviewed quite a few interesting people. But this is really a message for, what I'm doing with myself is I'm getting involved. I'm politically involved. I'm volunteering with a government entity. I'm studying law. I'm understanding how these systems work. I'm putting my time into potentially making a meaningful contribution in future in government, and not just because I care about humanity. Really, a lot of this is just about the fact that what's good for me, and if I ever have children one day, is good for the country. We don't. I think people get a bit too concerned about how people have to be these high priests and in high office. People need to understand what works and what doesn't, and they need to implement that at government levels. And what's good for the individual at the selfish level, providing they're doing things that benefit the system at large, they benefit everybody. It's the same with entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are selfish. They want to get rich, but they make things which make our lives easier. iPhones, for example. So I think one of the problems with the political system, I know you want to go, but the problem with the political system as well is that people are staying in for too long. Tony Abbott's been there since 1994. The politicians should be people from the community who see a cause, who see a problem, and bother themselves to get elected and go in for a period of 3 to 7 years, try and see off a few of those ideas, and then get the hell out and go back to whatever they were doing. Don't stay there for the next 20 years. And if you look at some of these politicians' backgrounds, a lot of them don't have very diverse backgrounds. They're lawyers, they're accountants, they've come from not real world. They're not real world. And Pauline Hanson's been an interesting phenomenon. I mean, she's from a PR perspective, she's always been funny to watch. And I think she does miss some of her ideas are very strange out there. But she was talking about the Asian invasion back in 1994, and now look where we are now. I mean, we've got China has economically taken over Australia. You can see it everywhere, and they're not There's a lot of what's happened with immigration which have hurt the average Australian in terms of their prosperity, and they are connections which are there that no one wants to talk about, but they're there. And unfortunately, you've also got to look at why governments do these things. Governments like to avoid recessions. They don't like the R word because they get voted out. And when a politician gets voted out...
there you go, that's another question. I actually thought about this the other day. Like, this is something in school they should teach. Recessions are going to happen. This is it. This is part of life.
Well, one other
cycles happen.
One other reform possibility for government also is we're so concerned about how much we pay these guys. The Prime Minister gets over $500,000 a year. I don't mind paying them $3 million a year. Some of the smartest people in this country earn a lot more than $500,000 a year. And none of them want to go into high office because it doesn't pay. And the public have this idea that the politicians have to love their country and do it for a small amount of money. It's just not going to happen. And I think that a politician should get paid what he last got paid. So if he was running a big company and getting $5 million a year just before the election, he should probably get that as the Prime Minister. And if we do that, we'll encourage a different type of DNA into the place. And we definitely don't do that. And it's a problem, and it needs to be looked at.
Marcus, mate, it has been wonderful chatting. I definitely want to do this again. I am Brett Slater. This is The Secret to Money. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll do it again, definitely.
Good to be with
you.
Thank you.
Shut up and sit down.